Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. It's Mr. Vallejo, and welcome to science class today. Today, I'll be taking a look at the chemistry of seawater with you. So let's go ahead and share the screen, and we'll go to today's PowerPoint. And there we are. So today we're taking a look at the chemistry of seawater. All right. Now, you probably know that seawater tastes a little salty, and that is because it is made up of many different ions, but primarily sodium and chloride. And when you stick sodium and chloride together, you get sodium chloride, which is table salt. That's why seawater tastes a little salty. In fact, of all the ions, minerals that are in seawater, about 85% of those are sodium and chloride. Now, the concentration of that salt, the concentration of all the different solutes, of all the different minerals that are dissolved, is actually not given as a percentage, but it's actually not parts per 100, but parts per 1,000. So this looks similar to the percentage symbol, but right here you have 2 zeros. And so that's how we measure salinity. Usually we say they're 35 parts per 1,000, or PPT. So if you see PPT, or if you see the symbol right here, we're talking about parts per 1,000. And again, it's about 35 parts per 1,000 on the average for ocean water. And if you take a look at this diagram here, tells you that if you add these two numbers together, look, that's 19 and 10. What you get is what, 29, but this is 1. So that is 11 and 19, that's 30. Okay, so 30 parts per 1,000 are from sodium and chloride. And you can see here's a list of the rest of the different minerals, the different chemicals that are also found in seawater at much less lower quantities at a much lower concentration. So if you add these up right here, it says percentage of total salinity. This is how you get the 85% number there for sodium and chloride. All right, so 35 parts per 1,000, but that's the average. It's not necessarily 35 parts per 1,000 everywhere. The salinity, different places have different salinities. Where it says here, ocean water near a location where a river meets the sea can be much less, because this is a photo of the Mississippi River, and there is the Mississippi River, and this is Louisiana right here. And the Delta region of Louisiana is filled with different locations here, different swamps and lakes and such. And those have a much lower salinity. Even a freshwater tank has a freshwater lake has some salt in it. In fact, when you have an aquarium at your house and you're trying to keep it more lifelike, what you do is you have to actually add salt back into your aquarium water, but not as much as 35 parts per 1,000. But over here, river meeting the sea, 15 to 25, so much lower salinity factor for this water here. This is also a very important place for organisms to reproduce. It's called an estuary region, and that's where the salt water and the fresh water mix. The fresh water from the rivers, the salt water from the ocean mix up, so you get a lower salinity, and many different organisms actually use these types of locations as their breeding ground. Other areas, instead of having a lower salinity, can have a higher salinity, and this is a example of a lake in Louisiana. This is Lake Charles, and Lake Charles has a higher salinity factor because the water is evaporating and no rivers are bringing in fresh water. So we have the water evaporating, so this gets saltier and saltier. We call that brackish water. Water is also relatively transparent. And because it's transparent, that sunlight can pass through a good section of the water. However, it does dissipate and it doesn't go down deep to the bottom of the ocean or anything. The bottom of the ocean is actually quite dark, and the sunlight can only go down in about 60 feet or so, about 10 meters. And so most of the organisms live on the top, on the surface of the ocean. It says here, this means the sunlight shining on the surface can penetrate the surface. But again, not to a great degree. So most of the organisms live on the top. The algae that provide the oxygen for the world, they're called the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton need light, and so they need to. Most of them are found in the top regions of the surface water. Okay. Solutes, stuff dissolved in the water, can also have an effect on how deep the water goes. Or how deep the light goes, how far the light can penetrate. So obviously you have a cloudy water with a lot of dissolved minerals, you're going to have light not go through as deep. Where those minerals come from? Those minerals come from the continents. If you take a look at this picture here, this is a really large rock. Well, how is it that we can break this really large rock? Well, this rock and the breakdown of the rock, actually, it's called weathering. So the weathering, a major factor is this large crack here. You can see in this picture right here, water goes in the cracks. And then in areas where things freeze, well, this water is going to expand. And it says down here in small print, it expands about 9% in volume. So the water goes in, but at night it freezes and it expands, and it pushes the surfaces of or the pieces of rock away from each other, and does this over and over every day. And so this is going to eventually, this freezing and then thawing out and freezing and thawing out, that cycles can break down even the largest rocks, as you can see right here. So you can add solutes to the water, but you also have seawater where you add water to the seawater to lower the salinity. It says here water comes from rivers and from rain, from precipitation, and to a much lesser extent, I should have wrote, from melting of the polar ice caps. Now, about 30, 40 years ago, they would say, hey, I remember when I first started teaching in the 1980s, they said that by the year 2000, the polar ice caps will melt so much that the levels of the ocean will rise up 65 feet. Well, if that happened, there would be many places in the world that would have cities start to go underwater, kind of like this stuff right here. This is Louisiana after a torrential rainstorm right there, and so you can add water, you can add solutes, you can take away water, take away solutes, and so these different factors can result in varying salinity of ocean water, of seawater, and of water in freshwater lakes. Not only are there minerals in the water, but there are also gases. The gases dissolve from the atmosphere into the ocean at the interface, which is in between the ocean and the atmosphere. So those gases will dissolve in. Here's a list of gases. It's oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. These will go into the ocean water from the atmosphere, but also going back up. Sometimes Well, the reverse reaction also happens. And it says here gases from the atmosphere dissolve at the sea surface, and occasionally the reverse happens. And actually, it's more like it does happen all the time. It's just that usually the net movement is from the atmosphere to the ocean. And so in the ocean, you have dissolved carbon dioxide, let's say. In the ocean, you have dissolved oxygen. There has to be enough dissolved oxygen so the fish have something to breathe in the water. The carbon dioxide is kind of interesting because you do have a certain amount of carbon dioxide that's dissolved into the ocean water, but as we from the past 200 years or so, we've had the industrialization of first world countries and combustion of oils and such, and that released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the last 200, 300 years. That means there's going to be more that dissolves into the ocean. So the oceans have more carbon dioxide, but that carbon dioxide reacts with the ocean water and forms acids. And so this is why you get the problem where that is known as ocean acidification, because the ocean is becoming more acidic because there's more carbon dioxide in the air, and that means there's more carbon dioxide that's dissolving into the ocean. So ocean acidification is a problem as the ocean becomes more acidic, and more living things are not adapted to live in that more acidic, that harsher environment. So could be a problem. Also, although most scientists say that the dinosaurs became extinct because the meteors would come down and 65 million years ago, there were meteors or giant meteors or something, and then they crashed down onto the earth, and then the atmosphere was filled with soot and dirt and pollution, and that blocked the rays of the sun, and so the plants died because they didn't get enough sunlight, and then the animals died because they didn't have enough to eat. Well, that's generally the theory that you hear. But there are some scientists that think that back in the day, 65 million years ago, there was also an increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this increase in carbon dioxide happened, and it wasn't just in the atmosphere, but there's an increase of carbon dioxide dissolved in the ocean. But it could be that this increase in carbon dioxide was not because of pollution from a meteor or a meteor storm or a giant meteor hit the earth, but it could be that what happens is that, well, you have this carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the water, and we'll see in a little bit, maybe that carbon dioxide from the ocean just came up all of a sudden. Now, all of a sudden, geologically, maybe in a period of 1,000 years or so, there was a great increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In essence, we can say that the ocean burped. Maybe the ocean burped and released a bunch of carbon dioxide, and that's what killed off all the plants and then animals 65 million years ago in one of the great extinctions. So that's an interesting theory. And then this bullet points at many organisms in the ocean utilize oxygen and release carbon dioxide. So, and that's true for land animals and plants also. You probably are familiar with the idea that animals use oxygen through respiration and then breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plants take that carbon dioxide and use it for photosynthesis, and we have that cycle. But it's more proper to say that, okay, so a plant can make its own food, but if a plant's making its own food, it's going to use that food too. And so when a plant uses its food, it also goes through respiration. So a plant also needs oxygen in order to go ahead and go on with its life activities, with its metabolism. So plants don't just use carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. Plants use oxygen also, and they use that oxygen to just to live. So so that's something we forget. Alrighty, this slide says conditions vary, and they do. We make some generalizations, but we have the ocean floor, the water column, the surface of the ocean. There are different zones that we're going to cover, and those different zones can be different in the amount of gases that they have. They can be described by the average temperature and what the trend is of the temperature as you go up and down. Could be whether it has dissolved minerals in the water or not. Is the water rich in nutrients, or is it really clear and devoid of nutrients? So different properties for different types of water. Also, another factor we have to contend with in the ocean is pressure, because as you go deeper in the ocean, they say that every 10 meters that you go down, if you're a diver, every 10 meters is going to result in an increase of 1 atmosphere of pressure. Now, 1 atmosphere, that's a chemistry term, but sometimes we say that an atmosphere equals 14.6 pounds per square inch of pressure. And so if you can imagine that, it's a lot of pressure. Our ears, for example, when you go up in a plane, you might have to yawn because you feel some tightening in your eardrum. What's happening is as you go up, the pressure decreases in the atmosphere. Also in the ocean, though, the pressure is going to decrease as you go up. And as you go up, then because there's less pressure on the outside and more pressure on the inside of your body, your eardrums are actually going to push out. So you might hear on takeoff, you might hear, or even later as you start increasing in your altitude, you hear some babies crying in the plane, or some little kids, some toddlers. So a good trick is to give them a piece of gum and have them chew, because then that'll open up the pressure, because then you can get some more air going through the eustachian tubes. And so you'll equalize the pressure on either side of your eardrum. You probably have swam in a large swimming pool and tried to go down to the bottom to touch the drain or go pick up a diving toy or something. When you're at the bottom of the swimming pool, essentially you're at the bottom of the pool and all this water is on top of you. And that's the pressure that you feel, because water weighs a lot, right? And so all that water pushing down on top of you is what you feel in your eardrums as you're, if you're diving deep into water, it's pushing in instead of going out. Okay, so as far as pressure goes, you can think of the atmosphere as a swimming pool of not water, but of air. And so at the bottom, at sea level, it's going to be a certain pressure, but as you go up, you're going to be going through the air and the air molecules do have a little bit of weight. So they're going to be pulled down by gravity and they're going to be found near the surface of the earth. But as you increase, or as you increase your altitude, as you go up and say a plane, you're leaving those air molecules all down there on the ground there. And so that's going to be a lower pressure. Even the change, like a 1 mile change, you can feel the difference. Because if you've ever gone from, say, a coastal state, you've gone from California or Louisiana up to, I remember I had a meeting in Colorado Springs, and we went to, and there was some of my colleagues were from Mississippi, and I'm from California. So when we got there, we actually had to acclimate a little bit, and all of us were getting headaches because there's less oxygen up there, even 1 mile up, 6,000 feet up. It's still, you have a reduced amount of oxygen, so your body needs to get used to that. All right, so here's a graphic showing what I was saying earlier. As you decrease 10 meters, there it is right there. As you decrease 10 meters, as you dive down, what you're going to see is you're going to see an increase in atmospheric pressure. And as you go way down deep there, look at this, 9 atmospheres of pressure at 80 meters. So that's a lot. So there you go. Okay, surface circulation. Some of the differences seen in different parts of the ocean are due to the circulation patterns. And the circulation patterns that we see on the surface of the ocean are generally driven by the wind. And so the wind is going to push the water along on the surface. But also what you're going to see is that the wind is powered by the sunlight. So differences in sunlight or differences in heat, really, in the solar energy are going to cause the wind patterns. And so when the wind hits the water, that's going to move it along. And so you can see in this picture right here, you can see some currents that are generally found in the in the Gulf of Mexico. You can see here is a west current, a western moving current close to Louisiana going across that way that we generally see because of the warmer waters down here are getting pushed up over here. There's the Gulf Loop current, and then this current starts going around. And as some waters move, like this one's moving east, you're going to have some waters move and replace that water. So this is going that way. Wherever there's a gap, you're going to see a movement over. You're going to see some water go in to fill those gaps. So some of the differences seen in different parts of the ocean are due to circulation patterns, and circulation can occur in the form of waves or tides, currents, gyres. Oceanic circulation is significantly driven by the wind patterns, and those wind patterns are due to the solar energy. And so that's a good illustration is the Gulf of Mexico and what happens there. All right, here's a GIF that shows you the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect is due to the spinning of the Earth, and the winds and the currents are both affected by the Coriolis effect. You can see in this picture down here, this arrow shows you that the Earth is rotating counterclockwise, and as the Earth is rotating, if you were in a plane trying to go south from, say, I don't know, what is this, Chicago down to Miami, if you were trying to do that and just fly straight, well, if you're in a plane, you have to end up, you can't just fly straight because of the constant circulation or rotation of the Earth. What you're going to see is any movement like that from north to south, from south going north, is going to be a curved pattern. So just because the Earth spins continuously, anything that passes over the Earth is deflected. And so in the northern hemisphere, those winds, those currents are deflected to the right, and it's opposite in the southern hemisphere. In Australia, winds and currents are deflected to the left. And since the Earth is spinning all the time, It causes this deflection of currents. And you see that, you see the main gyres in the ocean. And you especially see them when you take a look at the surface rotation patterns of the Pacific Ocean, especially. If you take a look at here's another picture showing you the Coriolis effect. And this is going from North Pole down to San Diego. And if you were trying to move down that way, you'd have to fly this way because of the constant rotation of the Earth. Now, this also causes the trade winds and the westerlies and the easterlies. And so it's a three-dimensional thing. It's easier to see on maybe a globe, but what happens is that at the equator, because the equator is slightly closer to the sun, you're going to see that the equator gets more energy per unit area. And because it gets more energy, more sunlight, then you're going to see the air is going to heat up and rise over the equator, but then it gets pushed to the north and south. I think that's a red arrow right here. You can see that it pushed to north, south, and as it gets pushed to the north and south, it's going to cool down. And air actually can hold less water when it's cooler. So what you're going to see is that when the air travels away from the equator, it's going to drop its water. And so that's why you get, in this area right here, you get the rainforest. Okay, so that's the rainforest right there. These are the trade winds coming across like that to replace the air that is moving this way. So this is moving up in the atmosphere and then moving across. And so when it gets down over here to this line, it's 30 degrees north and south of the equator, what happens is that air is going to come down, and that air has already lost most of its moisture. So around 30 north and south, that's where you're going to find deserts on the Earth, because the air is coming down and it's already lost a lot of its moisture. And then it just goes and it forms what we call a cell. It goes up at the equator and then across, and then goes down over here at the Tropic of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn. And then it gets pushed back over towards the equator. And so it starts to heat up. And as it starts to heat up, it sucks up any remaining moisture. And so that's another reason that you get desert winds, that you get desert areas around 30. So those are the trade winds. As sunlight heats the air rises, the cool air rushes in to take the place of the air that has risen. That's those yellow arrows right there. And that is that circulation pattern of the air going up in the atmosphere and then down in the atmosphere causes those winds. This is why winds are stronger at the coast. Winds at the coast are stronger during the day compared to during nighttime, because those winds are driven by the sunlight. So what you're going to see is the sunlight during the daytime is going to drive this process. You can see in this picture also the effect of the Coriolis effect. Those winds don't just go straight up and down, straight north and south, but because of the rotation of the Earth, you're going to see that they travel in this pattern. Because remember, the Earth is going this way, it's going counterclockwise, and as it goes counterclockwise, these winds here and these winds here are going to go to the left, and these winds here and these winds here, because they're going towards the poles, are going to go to the right. Over here, in between, there are areas where not as consistently windy. We call those areas the doldrums. So when people were trying to sail around the world, they would have to plan it out right, because then they didn't want to sit in a location that didn't have any winds. So that's the doldrum area right there. The winds that are consistently created in this manner at the equator are known as the trade winds. So that's these guys right here. And then these winds right here, those are the westerlies between 30 and 60. Okay. And then at the very top, I haven't mentioned yet, there is the polar easterlies that happen right there. And it is very windy near the poles, and that is because of the rotation of the Earth once again, and it's spinning around, and so that wind is spinning around as well. People sometimes think that the North Pole is a place where it's snowy and there's a lot of wind. Well, it's right that there's a lot of wind, but as far as the snow goes, there's a lot of water at the equator. That's where you get the tropical rainforests. But a lot of that water drops between 0 and 30, and even more drops between 30 and 60. So by the time the air makes its way up to the poles, the water vapor in the atmosphere, it's hardly any of that left. And so actually the poles are not places where there's a lot of snow. It just seems like that because the winds are kicking up. And so these are the wind patterns that are typical in on the world. And this is right over here. You can see those air cells that I was talking about. And so here you see the air coming down, and right here, here's the air being heated. And so because it's heated, it goes up and it moves over there, and that's where you get that circulation pattern right there. Now it's not as simple as this because the land gets in the way, but if you see right here, here are the continents, well then the ocean just, okay, so there's the northern equatorial current going across like that. So you get a counterclockwise movement of the Pacific Ocean and Northern Pacific Ocean. By my house, the water is always a little cooler because the water is coming down from Alaska. In Louisiana, the water is coming from further south. So the water is warmer. If you've ever been to Florida on vacation, man, right over here, that water is warmer than you would expect. And it's warmer than you expect because the water is coming up from, again, the equator right there. And this movement of water then starts, and you get that very generalized circulation pattern. Every once in a while in the Pacific Ocean, you get something where these things get goofed up, these currents get flipped around, and that's called an El Nino event. And we'll take a look at that later in class. All righty, there are 3 layers of the ocean as you go down. There's the surface layer and the intermediate layer, and then there's the deep water and the bottom layer. The numbers now are 200 and 1,000. So the surface is 0 to 200. The intermediate layer is 200 to 1,000, and then the bottom layer is just below 1,000. The Earth, the oceans go down to 4.5 miles deep. So you probably know that the deepest part of the ocean, the Marianas Trench in the Pacific Ocean, man, that's like 36,000 feet down. That's quite a ways down. So this is in meters, but a meter is a it's about 3 feet in a meter. So 36,000 feet down, that's pretty deep. Okay, if you take a look at this diagram right here, this shows you how these three things change in the different layers. And in the surface layer, you have a certain expectation of temperature near the surface, so you expect it to be warmer. And then at the deep layer and the bottom layer, the temperature of the water is much lower. In the intermediate level, as far as temperature goes, you see a gradual decrease in temperature and a gradual increase in the density of water. The density is how, it's the formula for density is mass over volume. So you're going to get more and more salt stuck in there in the deep layer water. And so because the deep layer water is saltier, it's going to stick near the bottom. and so that's temperature and density. And over here you can see the differences in salinity, which are moving a little bit, especially at intermediate level between 200 and 1,000, but fairly consistent at 35 parts per thousand as you go into that deep layer right there. So it can be higher and lower, as we talked about earlier, but once you get to the deep layer, it's pretty consistent right there. So that water sometimes, as it goes down, as it hits a continent, that downward turning is called a downwelling of water, and that water sinks and it goes under. And that's because of temperature and salinity, and it has hit a landmass. So downwelling is good though, brings gases from the surface down to those deeper layers. So those deeper layers have, have oxygen in them because of the downwelling in certain areas. You probably more likely have heard of an upwelling. An upwelling happens off the coast of Peru. There's really good fishing, and the reason there's really good fishing right here is because of the upwelling of water, and the currents move the deep water up when it hits South America. And so the area to the west of Peru and Ecuador and Chile, all these are really good for fishing because the water is nutrient rich, and the fish are able to reproduce, get what they need so that they can have a higher reproductive rate. So that's why we see a lot of good fishing grounds there because of the upwelling as the nutrients move up. Then as far as waves go, waves are the result of winds blowing over the water surface. As you can see right here, this area right here is called the fetch. That's the area affected by the wind. And so when you have a larger fetch, you're going to have some bigger waves. And so this is where the wind is hitting the water. And so if it's blowing this way and it's blowing right in this area, this fetch right here, you're going to see big waves over here. So the waves are a result of the wind blowing over the water surface, and things that determine the size of waves include how long and fast the wind blows, but also it's going to be affected by the bottom of the ocean, because those waves aren't going to curl over until they get to touch essentially the bottom of the ocean. And before we go into that, here are the parts of the wave. They're the same as a sound wave. So this is part of my physics talk. But if you have a wave, the wavelength is the area between a trough and a trough, or a crest and a crest. The height of a wave is called the amplitude right there. And so these are important things to know about waves. And if you were to sit right here and watch the waves go by and count the waves, then the time between two crests, let's say, that would be what we call the period of a wave, or as I wrote here, the wave period. There's a trough, here's a crest, and amplitude, wavelength. These are terms you should know to have to do with parts of the wave. Now, I was saying that the wave curls over, and you can see that right here. We say that the wave is breaking there, and this wave doesn't break until it hits the shallow water. When it gets to shallow water, then we're going to have the breaking of the wave, and where that happens continuously, that's called the surf. The surf can actually move the beach when it's like I say that spring in California, the beach sand will actually move up, and during the winter where there's really strong storms, and the surf will actually take off some of the sand, and some of the beaches will go away. So says here, as waves near the shore, the bottom of the wave drags the bottom, and that's when it starts to break, because then it starts to, all these waves here get piled up and start to slow down, and so the wavelength changes and it gets shorter. And so the when the top of that wave right there falls over, that's when we say it breaks. Okay, so here's another picture showing you a series of waves there. There's a ocean bird sitting there on the top, just riding the waves right there. The last topic that pertains to this is the tides. And so the tides, you have the tides are defined as the rhythmic rising and falling of sea surface levels. And we can see in this diagram right here, what it is the tide is due primarily, and people get this wrong, but it's primarily due to the pull of the moon, as the moon is much closer to the earth than the sun. So when the moon is close, that's when you get a high tide. But if you pull this side over and the water is pulling up, then on the other side of the earth, there's going to be a matching high tide. And then the edges, they're going to have low tide because all the water is piling up here and here. So that's why you have high tides and low tides. And the sun is much, much more massive, but it's 93 million miles away. So it had a lesser effect on the ocean waves. Now, you're going to have, during the course of the day, you're going to have a couple of high tides typically and a couple of low tides. That would be, if we didn't have any land, then that's what it would be. But because of the land that affects the tides, and so some places will have only one tide, high tide, and one low tide, or a different combination of these different things. So most places have a semi-diurnal or a semi-diurnal tide pattern where you have two highs and two lows during a 24-hour period. You have, well, let's see. So normally tides at night are higher and lower than daytime tides. And then the number and size of tides varies geographically and can be affected by bottom features and all kinds of different places. There's a place in Canada called the Bay of Fundy, which is known for its very big tides, and because it's in a bay, and so during the course of the day, you have a really big change in the heights of the low and the high tide. And so we would say that that area has a very high or very large tidal range. You can see here's another diagram that shows you the high tides. And so there's the moon right there pulling the ocean up. And so because it's pulling up here, it's the rest of the ocean getting bigger there, but not as tall on the edges right here. Okay. And this shows you what would happen if you're looking at it from a bird's eye view. And you could see that, okay, the high tide's at midnight, at 6 in the morning. This same place where the flag is now over here. So you're going to see the low tide. And then at noontime, it's going to pass through the high tide because here's the Earth rotating if you're looking at it from above. And so here's the flag over here in the high tide, and about 6 o'clock in the evening, you're going to have have it go through your location is going to go through the low tide, and then back over here, going to have the high tide again. It says here not quite the high tide. That's because the lunar time is not our 24-hour day, but it's 24 hours and 50 minutes. So that's why the tide is going to be, if it's midnight on this day, at the high tide, it's going to be a different time, 12:50. See that? And so that's why the times of the tides are going to change. Here's another diagram that shows us the same thing. But this is the difference between the spring and the neap tide. The spring tide is when the moon and the sun are pulling together, and the neap tide happens when the sun and the moon are pulling at 90-degree angles from each other. So here's another spring tide. This is during the new moon, and this is during the full moon. So when you see the full moon, this is when you're high tide, or when you have a situation where you only see a very small sliver of the moon, that's going to be a spring tide as well. The neap tides happen in between, 2 weeks in between, and that's because the moon and the sun are pulling at different angles from each other. So those are the tides, and some animals, some organisms like these grunion here, during the summer months in Southern California, actually use the tide patterns as times to reproduce. What they want to do is time it so that they can go further up on the coast, and then they will, up on the beach that is, and then they will lay their eggs up high here on the beach, and then as the tides go out over the course of the month, these eggs are sitting out of the water, still moist, but not deep in the ocean or anything. And then when the next time period comes, then it'll come and wash away those that smelt, that eggs, and those fertilized eggs will go back into the ocean. That's how grunion reproduce. When they come up like this is called a grunion run. If you have a California fishing license, you can go out and grab some of these guys and throw it in your bucket. So it's a common occurrence during the summer months in Southern California. But grunion aren't the only ones. There are other animals that time their reproduction according to the tides, and so that's significant. All right, so chemistry of seawater and some other topics that have to do with that today. I hope you saw something that was insightful for you today, and I will see you next time. All righty. All right.